Welcome back everyone to Genshin Interact. We'll be taking a look at the second half of the 4.1 banners today. First looking into another new Fontaine character, Wriothesley, and another Archon rerun with Venti on the other side. Let's go through both of these banners and see whether or not they are a good pulling option for you.
If you do enjoy the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe and check out the rest of the channel for other videos you may be interested in. We also have a Discord you can join where our members can talk with each other and just talk with us. The Duke of the Fortress of Meripede and the famous drunk bard might be tempting, but are they for you?
Now, onto the video. Well, the first character we're going to be looking at is Wriothesley, and he is the new character. If a lot of you guys have already gone through the story quest or the Archon quest for Fontaine, you guys already know who the Duke of the Fortress of Meripede is, and that is going to be Wriothesley. So the first thing we are going to be kind of talking about with him is his team function, where he kind of fits in a team. So Rift, how can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, well, he looks to be like a great cryo DPS, an on-fielder, heavily selfish with his damage through his skill and burst. Kind of remind me a little bit of like Hazo and some gameplay we saw in the live stream a few weeks ago. But other than that, being a DPS and maybe thinking we might talk a little bit more about Melt and Freeze teams later on, but looking specifically into his kit, what can you tell us, Vixen, about maybe what he ascends into and some interesting things about what he can do?
Well, the first thing we want to look into is what he ascends into, and he's going to ascend into crit damage. Now this is going to be very, very good, especially for cryo characters, because his weapon, which we'll talk about later, goes into crit rate to kind of balance the ascension into crit damage, but also the cryo resonance gives crit rate already to opponents that are affected by cryo element. So you're getting that crit rate increase as well, so ascending into crit damage is actually really, really nice, and I think it's going to help him to actually fill into that DPS role that you were just talking about. Now looking at his normal attack, they're called Forceful Fists of Frost, and because he is a Cryo Catalyst, all of these attacks will be Cryo hits, and so that's actually going to be a lot of fun. Like you were talking about Hazo, very similar, how his is constantly going to be ammo. It's the same thing here, even though they are a little bit more melee hits. This and his burst seem to be his main way of damage, so by the way, just to make sure, you guys are probably going to want to level into both of these, whereas if you guys look at someone like Hazo, it seems like Hazo actually uses his skill a lot more.
Next, we're going to look at his skill, which is called Ice Fang Rush. Basically, he will sprint forward and enter what is called the Chilling Penalty state. Now, in this state, it will increase Wriothesley's interruption resistance and also enhance and increase his normal attack damage when HP is above 50%. When he hits an opponent with one of these enhanced normal attacks, he will lose a fixed amount of his HP.
Thinking and looking at this, actually, I think that his skill, his burst, and his normal attack, all three ways are going to be huge ways to actually get damage out. So maybe actually leveling all of these in the same, keeping them all at 8s, all at 9s and 10s, actually is probably your best way to maybe help that Chilling Penalty state do better, his normal attacks do more damage. And like right now, we're going to talk about his burst, which is Dark Gold Wolf Bite. This is basically going to be one huge giant hit of cryo right in front of him, and it's going to cause multiple instances of AoE cryo damage. After multiple instances of cryo damage that are done by Wriothesley in this burst, an Uzia-aligned cryo damage hit will descend on the opponent. Looking at other character comparisons though, there are no other cryo catalysts, but he does seem very similar to Hazo. Close combat catalysts, both of them are. Hazo, although he focuses on the normal attacks and skill damage, it seems like Wriothesley just uses his skill to buff his normal attacks, so it's a little bit different in that sense, but both of their bursts seem like they're very nice bits of damage, but maybe they're not the full focus of what their entire kit kind of balances on. Looking at the other side of the banner, it does seem that we're going to be getting that rerun for Venti, and Venti's kind of team function, and we already kind of know where he kind of fits in a team. He's going to be that off-field, and he does have the ability to be an on-field kind of character, but most people are just going to be using him for his Viridescent Venerer usage for his support abilities alongside of his burst that can be off-field and just pulling enemies together. But unlike maybe some other characters that have very similar ideas to them, they may not put out a crazy ton of damage, whereas Venti actually seems like he can put out a good amount of damage and builds well into that. Now going into his kit though, Rift, what can you tell us about that?
So first off, we see that Venti ascends into Energy Recharge. I think this is really good for him, especially if you're going that support route. Naturally, you're going to want ER for his burst uptime, so that's definitely a win right there. Looking at his normal attack, this is called Divine Marksmanship. Nothing really special about that. It's pretty standard to any bow character. He doesn't get any kind of infusions or anything like that, so it is what it is. But looking at his skill, this is called Skyward Sonnet. If you just press it, it will do an AoE Anemo damage hit and then also lift opponents in the air briefly. And if you hold this skill, it will again do AoE animo damage and lift opponents in the air, but it also will create this updraft of wind that Venti rides into the air during the hold version. And then enemies will fall slowly if hit with this skill. You can also use this updraft to kind of just glide with, maybe reach some higher areas. It's pretty fun to use for exploration. Some cool things you can do with it there. But Vixen, what can you tell us about the burst?
His burst is called Wind's Grand Ode, and this is once again going to be the focus of your Venti's actual damage and his support capabilities. It creates a Storm Eye that sucks in opponents and deals continuous animo damage. If the Storm Eye comes into contact with Hydro, Pyro, Electro, or Cryo, it will deal additional elemental damage of that type, but just make sure that it can only grab one element, so make sure you grab the element that you want. Quick passive that we do want to mention, we do sometimes with certain characters, if they are kind of cool, different things that can help out maybe more than just themselves, or it's just a really good passive we like to mention. In this, we're going to be looking at Venti's second passive talent, which is called Storm Eye. This passive talent will help Venti regenerate 15 energy to himself after the burst ends, and if the Storm Eye absorbs an element of some kind, this restores 15 energy to all party members with that corresponding element. Other characters we kind of look into that are very similar: Kazuha, Sucrose, and Jean. Kazuha has a very good pulling ability, but his main thing is giving an elemental damage bonus and having a high elemental mastery. We already know about that. Sucrose is basically your 4-star version of Venti and Kazuha to kind of be a little bit better, but none of these characters, including even Jean, have such a great pulling together mechanism like Venti. He is the Anima Archon, so he is going to be the best for it.
Now looking at the weapon banner, we're going to first be looking at Cashflow Supervision, which is going to be Wriothesley's signature weapon. This has a main stat of 22.1% crit rate at level 90 that Vixen did mention earlier, that he ascends into crit damage, so it's going to be very, beneficial to getting his crit ratio to be balanced. And I will be mentioning the abilities on this weapon, assuming it's Refinement 1. It will increase attack by 16%, and also says that when the current HP increases or decreases, normal attack damage will be increased by 16%, and charged attack damage will be increased by 14% for 4 seconds. Now this has a max of 3 stacks, so I can see that kind of ramping up pretty high just at Refinement 1. And when you have the max 3 stacks, the attack speed will increase by an additional 8%. So it looks very good for him, and we already do know he's got some HP mitigation of like just increasing and decreasing in his kit we mentioned a little bit earlier. So that's just going to be really great for him. Maybe some other characters you could use this weapon on though is probably Wanderer or Hazo or maybe even Yanfei, just because it is just helping normal and charged attack damage, which we know that all 3 of those other units can use very well. Especially, I like how you put in there Yanfei, because Yanfei's main way of damage is through charged attack and a little bit of the normals, but she really peaks on those charged attack hits.
Skyward Harp is the other weapon on the other side of the banner, and it does have a main stat of 22.1% crit rate, also at level 90, just like the other weapon, Cashflow Supervision. The abilities will also be restated at Refinement 1. This weapon increases crit damage by 20%, and hits have a 60% chance to inflict a small AoE attack, dealing 125% physical damage. This is very nice since the 22% crit rate from the main stat and 20% crit damage on the ability is really nice to just kind of maybe help buff your Venti or some of your other characters for bow damage users, are just going to actually help to get more crits to actually help them do a little bit better. The best characters for this weapon obviously is going to be Venti with the first and foremost, but some other characters that could use this is basically just any damage bow character, really, for the crit rate and the crit damage, just really nice. Now we're going to go into our summary and our pulling options and looking at the different questions that we like to ask people. So the first question we like to ask is, do you need either character on your account? And Rift, how can you answer that?
Well, looking at Wriothesley, if you already have a cryo DPS, you may want to skip. That being said, if you have, let's say, Ayaka on your account and she's built for a freeze team, but you want a melt team with another cryo DPS, then maybe you can go after Wriothesley, because you'd want to build maybe him for melt and keep her on freeze. He seems like he'll be a great DPS, it just depends on if you actually need him or if you just want him. Now looking at Venti, having Venti could fix so many issues on an account that doesn't have an Animo Viridescent Venerary user. His ability to pull all your enemies to one area with his burst and giving energy back to other units can make fighting hordes of enemies that much easier. That being said, Kazuha, Sucrose, and even Jean can fill the same role and do pretty well for you at that. So if you already have some of those characters very well built, it may not be necessary for you to pull Venti.
Another question we like to look at is what elements or roles is your account in need of? Looking at Wriothesley, if you do not have a cryo character on your account yet, or you maybe need a 5-star DPS, I believe Wriothesley will be a great pick for you. Getting him will ease you into the cryo element because of how much he can apply cryo to the certain enemies because he's a cryo catalyst. It will help early players get used to reactions, and while Wriothesley just uses supports and hits enemies hard with normal attacks, other cryo DPS characters have kits that maybe aren't too difficult to understand, but they have a lot of setup, or maybe they take a while to get their hits to get on to actually going. So it takes a lot of setup, and it's a lot more maybe thought process and actual trying to think about how to set them up correctly. Whereas Wriothesley, it seems like you just press your skill and go ham with his normal attacks. So I think his cryo DPS ability in terms of maybe difficulty is going to be a little bit lower. Venti is a great addition to any account, especially if you are lacking Animo characters. Once again, if you do have some of the other heavily built Animo 5-stars, like Kazuha or Jean, or even the 4-star Sucrose, these characters that Rift was just talking about, you may not need another Viridescent Venerer support. That being said, Venti can do more personal damage compared to all of those characters though. So make sure to just maybe think about those different characters. If you've already got them heavily built, it may not be necessary to get him, but his damage does outweigh the other characters most of the time.
Our next question is, do you have the resources to properly invest into the characters that you pull? Well, Wriothesley will need Fontaine materials, some of which are not out at the making of this video. So for new players, finish the Archon quest in Mondstadt, and then a teleport waypoint will be unlocked in the northeast of Sumeru's Realm of Fire Curd. Venti, however, uses Mondstadt materials, so getting materials for him will be easy enough for new players. Our next question is, what kinds of teams are you trying to build? Wriothesley seems like he'll work best on a freeze and or melt team. Because of his high cryo application, the teams could be endless here. Speaking of being in endless teams, Venti fits in almost every team you could think of. If you put him on a Viridescent Venerer set, he can be a flex character to buff your Hydro, Pyro, Electro, and Cryo characters with his set, while also dealing a good amount of damage himself from off-field.
Next, we're going to look at weighing the dangers between new free-to-play players, people that have been playing for a long time, veteran players, even looking at those free-to-play players that are veterans, whales, whatever. We're going to look at everyone. At the end of the day, they are your hard-earned primos, so you should decide on how you spend them. Free-to-play players need characters that slot into a lot of different teams, into a plethora of different teams, that make a lot of the game at the early part very easy before the late game content kicks in, so they can get used to the game before harder content hits them. Wriothesley just might be that character for you. We've talked about how great of a character he can be for you even in the early game. The danger a new player can run into here, though, is getting a cryo DPS when they already have a cryo DPS like Ayaka or Ganyu. We've talked about it a lot already, that how a lot of different characters, you want to try to get a lot of different elements, and so maybe stacking into one element might actually hurt you down the line, especially if you're trying to do the Abyss and maybe try to get as quickly there as possible. Venti is another great character to get, but it is usually better to make sure you have a DPS character first. Now, I know that Venti can be a DPS, but it would be more beneficial for newer players to go after solid DPS characters like Raiden, Hu Tao, El Haytham, Wriothesley, who is on the other side, some other DPS characters that are going to be basically almost the meta if they're trying to make sure that they are huge damage dealers.
Now looking at veteran spenders and veteran free-to-play players, you should already have a decent lineup by now, and possibly even 2 4-person teams for the Spiral Abyss. And so now what we're going to be thinking about is looking at Wriothesley. You know, getting him might help to have an extra cryo team for melt and freeze teams, or just a fun character to use. And then Venti, he should be high on your list to get, even if you already have Kazuha. He's very nice to have, so you can have Kazuha and Venti on either side of the Abyss to help your teams out. If you are a high spender, look into what constellations will benefit characters the most. And as a general rule, most good constellations, other than the C6 of course, are going to be that C1 and C2 for a majority of characters in the game. So first off, looking at Wriothesley, his first constellation will probably be best to go after, since it enhances his passive to do more damage in his skill state, which we talked about in the first part of the video. Venti's second constellation decreases Animo resistance by using both versions of his skill. This helps any Venti that's built for more damage focus, or maybe a Venti that's placed in a mono Animo team to help your other Animo damage dealers, maybe like Wanderer and Hazo, or even Zhao, for example.
The last question we need to look at is, do you need the weapons? Now, Cashflow Supervision is great for its crit rate, attack increase, normal attack damage increase, and attack speed increase. All of these are great for Wriothesley, but other characters could obviously use them. The issue that could maybe come here, though, is that a lot of these characters don't have the ability to lose HP consistently in their actual kit. And some of them, specifically Wanderer, don't really want to get hit a lot, especially when they're in their skill, because they're going to get knocked out and use up those Kuguryoku points, and that's just not a fun time you want to have at all. Wanderer and Heizo are great examples for this though, and although once again this may be true, most of these characters who could use this weapon have a variety of other good damage catalysts already to use, so it's not really good to go after this specific catalyst for those characters. Skyward Harp could be good for most damage dealers since it gives both crit rate and crit damage, but once again, this is not a great weapon to go after even if you have Venti, since you can get this weapon by losing a 50-50, since the Skyward series is already on the ability for you to lose any 50-50 and actually get it. And Venti can use plenty of other weapons, including 4-stars, that are pretty good for him, including the 4-star Battle Pass weapon.
We hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters or weapons coming up on this next banner are for you.
As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, go ahead and let us know in the comments. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.